Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. I present the report of the Community Affairs Reference Committee on Lyme-like illness in Australia, together with the Hansard record of proceedings and documents presented to the committee, and move that the report be printed.
The question before the Senate is that the report be printed. Those in favour say aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Senator Siewert.
I move that the committee take note of this report. This report consists of 3 chapters. We talk about the patients and outline where the details of how the inquiry was conducted, and also the background to Lyme disease. We also talk about then testing for infection and treating the illness. Just to remind the chamber, this is in fact the committee's second report on this inquiry. We tabled an interim report in May where we articulated some of the details around patient illness, the nature of the illness, the divided nature of the medical profession on this, that people feel stigmatised, they feel bullied and harassed, and in fact that makes people sicker. We articulated in that report the need for some further inquiry and what the committee would do if we were if after the election, and if the Senate was so minded to re-refer this issue to us, that we would like to look at, or needed to look at, the issues around testing for the infection and also treating people. So the first chapter of this of this report is titled "Putting Patients First." And the reason that we've articulated that and put that is because that's what we think needs to happen. For too long, it has gone unacknowledged in this country that people are really sick. There's been arguments about whether this is classic Lyme, chronic Lyme, or Lyme-like illness. In fact, there's a growing consensus now that we shouldn't call it Lyme at all, and we should be referring to it as something else, and there's a number of other names that have been suggested, so that the stigma that goes with Lyme, it's not just the stigma, it's the fixation on the actual Lyme. Now, what I should articulate here is that we've had a lot of evidence from hundreds and hundreds of submitters and a number of people that appeared before us. There is continuing disagreement over how you test for the presence of Lyme. There is continued dispute over whether the bacteria is actually in this country or not. Borrelii, and I always stuff up the pronunciation of the American version of the bacteria that affects this, which is Borrelii burgdorferi, and there's other types types in Europe and Asia, and whether that actually exists in Australia. But while that argument has been going on, people have been sick. There is now research, and we heard again of the research that's being done on identifying other pathogens in ticks. So people are at the moment referring to the illness more like a tick-borne illness, because these new pathogens are being identified here in Australia, and it is we're yet to identify whether they can be transmitted to humans, and what those pathogens, what impact they could have on human health. So we make 12 recommendations, and they address these issues. So 12 recommendations around testing, and then around how we support the patients that are sick. We talk about the need for the committee to, the Australian Government Department of Health engage with stakeholders following the publication of the national, and this is the only time I'm going to attempt to say this, I'm looking at Senator Moore because she knows I can't pronounce serological very well, but the Serological Reference Laboratory, which is commonly known as NSRL, Yeah. It's the NRSL, Senator Cameron, that they are currently doing a review of the serological assays used to diagnose Lyme disease, because that's in dispute at the moment. So there certainly needs to be discussion and extensive consultation with stakeholders once that review is done, and I'm very pleased that review is in fact being done. The committee recommends that the Australian government increase funding for research into tick-borne pathogens as a matter of urgency. This funding should include funding for research on pathogens which may cause infection, funding for research on whether newly identified pathogens can cause illness in humans, and funding for the development of diagnostic tests, and that's where a lot of the arguments are, that could detect infection by any newly identified pathogens endemic to Australia. This is really important, that we have this research to look at these pathogens. As I articulated, Professor Irwin from Murdoch University is, representatives from Murdoch presented evidence to this particular hearing, our latest hearing, where they've identified more pathogens in ticks, but in other vectors as well. That research is essential, and we need to make sure that that is adequately funded. We make a number of other recommendations about the need to fund more research into in particular, the issue to establish a clinical trial of treatment guidelines with the aim of determining a safe treatment protocol for patients of tick-borne illness. Where we're going with this is that while we are doing that research to identify possible pathogens, to identify the vector, what we need to be doing is treating people who are sick. We need to make sure that people who are sick are no longer stigmatised, are no longer told that it's in their head, and that's what patients are being told. People who are sick, who have a number of ailments and symptoms, I should say, are being told it's in their head. Now I know that if I was really, really sick and I was being told it was in my head, it would actually make me even sicker and worry. And it may in fact affect my mental health if I'm being told when I'm suffering that it's all in my head. So we need to be acknowledging that people are sick, and we need to be, I think, supporting bringing the groups together, and in fact we recommend that a summit be held to start working out a way forward. But we also need to be looking at allocating, and we've recommended that the government allocate funding for research into medically appropriate treatment of tick-borne disease, and that medical authorities measure the value of treatment in terms of patient recovery and return to health. The best treatment options must then be developed into clinical treatment guidelines. We also recommend that the committee recommends that the Australian Government Department of Health facilitate as a matter of urgency a summit to develop a cooperative framework which can accommodate treatment, patient and medical needs, with the objective of establishing a multidisciplinary approach to addressing tick-borne illness across all jurisdictions. By doing that, I think that will help to build confidence and relationships between stakeholders that are very deeply divided at the moment. And if we are going to address this issue, we cannot afford to continue the way it's currently being handled. We make, as I said, 12 recommendations, which I know my colleagues will also address when they get up to make their contribution. I would like to take the opportunity to thank all those who made submissions, all those people that appeared before our inquiry. People shared some of their most personal details of their illness, of their struggle with this illness and with the way they have been treated, and they were very generous with their time and with sharing that very personal information, so I thank them very much. I thank our Secretariat, who has done once again an outstanding job. The Community Affairs Committee staff, as I said yesterday, go above and beyond the call of duty. They've made a significant contribution with this inquiry. I hope that the work that our committee has done will help to start getting this issue addressed very seriously, that people are acknowledged as being sick, they get the treatment they need, and we put money into research to try and find out just what is going on. Something is going on. The committee isn't claiming that we've solved this. We hope our recommendations will help us find a way forward on this very difficult issue.
Thank you, Senator Siewert. Senator Lambie.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. I rise to speak today on the issue of Australian Lyme disease, or more commonly known as the tick-borne disease. I want to thank the committee. A lot of this was really heart-wrenching, it really was, and it's right up there with veteran stories, I can tell you. It was just heartbreaking to see the impact it's having on them and their families. The public hearings have opened my eyes to the dysfunction of the medical system that we have in this country. I was stunned and ashamed. Our government and the medical system that has allowed a great number of people to suffer simply to debate whether Lyme disease exists or not. You've heard me talk before on medical issues, but like I said, this one leaves me determined to make things right for the thousands of people who've been bitten by ticks in their own country or in other countries and have been left sick, seriously debilitated, dying and stigmatised by the medical community who is meant to be there to help them. They are told it's in their heads, just like the good senator said, Siewert. I can tell you, I have never seen a child. I have never seen a child choose to live their life confined to a wheelchair. During my brief time with the committee, I heard, like I said, heartbreaking stories of neglect, where people have been discharged home from hospitals to die alone, completely abandoned by our own medical system here in our own country. And I heard of children whose lives have been ruined due to the disease our medical experts maintain we can't possibly have here in Australia. Birds fly, ticks come in on imported livestock, people on mobile, and they travel. But many in medical profession would have us believe that Australia has magical borders that have no tick might even pass through, which is absolute rubbish. Yet in reality, people are being bitten by ticks in their own backyards, and they are getting sick. Some develop meat allergies, some have seizures. Many more have a massive list of symptoms that put them in wheelchairs, unable to go to school or work to earn a living. We could help them when they are bitten by a tick with a simple course of antibiotics, and even if it is for a long extended time, there seems to be a 70% success rate by using this method. But not our medical folks, not our Australian medical doctors here, argue about that too, and just recently they started a new campaign to further stigmatise these people as the creators of superbugs, as justifiable reason to withhold antibiotics that will save their lives. Our medical people and scientists are caught up in the ridiculous game of somatics. They say we can't find a bug here, but they don't tell you they haven't bothered to look for more than 25 years. So it's a self-serving argument, really. What I want to know is why won't we prioritise funding to sift through the questions and end the suffering, 25 years of it. During the hearings, I could not believe what I was hearing from our health department, who had done nothing in the last 4 years since the issue was raised, but, and I quote, discuss it. A bunch of highly paid bureaucrats sit by discussing the topic while Australian people suffering from years of illness and medical neglect have taken their own lives due to the lack of treatment and help available. I cannot imagine how appallingly helpless these people must have felt. This is shameful, Australia. It is absolutely shameful. And there are thousands still out there suffering. An internationally renowned expert on Lyme disease who gave evidence at our hearing referred to the dysfunctional politics and the political scientific quagmire to describe the way in which our health departments and medical system has handled this issue. I'm fairly certain that when Prime Minister Turnbull refers to the innovation and agility, this is not how he wants the Australian medical and scientific system to be viewed. This situation must end with the tabling of the Senate inquiry report. It is not acceptable to dismiss these people because the medical system, the pathology system and the bureaucrats who administer the health system that is meant to support them have all colluded to deny a disease that absolutely exists in Australia. I won't be letting this go, and I've got a feeling that especially the ladies that were on the committee will not be letting this go either. So this government has no other choice but to acknowledge there is an issue here, prioritise funding needed for research, And while that is going on, do something proactive to help those people who are sick with this disease in a way that is neither hostile nor discriminatory. And immediately commence an awareness campaign to alert people to the dangers of tick bites, and a medical education campaign so the doctors and the medical industry know what to do when faced with a patient with this illness. You know, there were some really harrowing stories in that. Like I said before, we need to do something. You know, and you want to talk about time sensitive, this is now time sensitive. We have done this inquiry and the recommendations there, and you know what, I don't want to see those recommendations picked up and put on a shelf. These people have been through enough. This is time sensitive. This is beyond time sensitive. So I'm asking those across there to please invest some money in this and do the right thing. Do the summit, bring these people to the table and finally bring this out in the open, because there is a lot of sick Australians out there. And turning our backs and saying that we don't have a tick-borne disease here is absolute rubbish. It's time to open our eyes and take it out of the too hard basket and deal with it once and for all.
Thank you, Senator Lambie. Senator Siewert, were you intending to seek leave to continue your remarks? Sorry, Senator Moore.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President. Taking up from where Senator Lambie finished in her contribution, I think it's very important that we as a committee and we as a parliament accept that we have come a long way on the discussion of, I'm hesitant to actually use the term Lymes. I think one of the messages of our committee has been that the concentration on the definition has actually caused movement away from looking at the real issue, and the real issue is acknowledging that there are people who are ill in our country, and there are people who are expecting that there will be respect and treatment for the condition that they have. But unfortunately, because so often the terminology is Lyme, you find yourself slipping into calling it Lyme or Lyme-like or classic Lyme or the other things that have been used. But Mr Acting Deputy President, as Senator Lambie said, and I know that Senator Siewert said as well, the time to act is now. But I also want to add into this contribution that I think that if you take where we were in this discussion 6 months ago to where we are now, there has been considerable movement. And maybe not at the speed, in fact certainly not at the speed with which many people hoped that we would. But I remember very clearly, and Senate estimates in this place, when any issues were raised about this condition, there was a blanket refusal by the department and by the medical profession as a whole to even acknowledge that there was such a condition that impacted so deeply on people that was caused by the tick-borne infection caused in Australia. We were subject to long explanations about how this condition started overseas, how the testing regime operated, and acknowledgement that there was indeed a condition called Lyme that had been identified in parts of America and in Europe. And in fact, we sat through extensive conversations about this, and still at this stage we have evidence in our committee that anyone who has exhibited symptoms and had testing when they have said that they have been bitten by ticks overseas are given the acknowledgement that they would be suffering from a Lyme or a Lyme-like condition. However, in terms of the number of people who came to see us in our committee, the real point were the people who came to tell us about their condition, their pain, their suffering, their frustration, when they had never been in the countries overseas, but they knew that they had been subject to being bitten by ticks in Australia. And we had so much evidence, Mr Deputy President, all of which is on record, and I really do encourage people who are interested in this issue to go and look at the evidence that we did receive and hear what the response was from very many people who felt that not only had they been dismissed by their medical profession in this country, but they had been rejected and they had been discriminated against and they had been treated without any respect at all. And as Senator Lambie said, that causes, I think, shame to all of us. And I think that what we have seen in I think about 6 months from when we started pushing on this issue recently, though the issue has been around in the community affairs space for a couple of years, there has been significant movement, which was quite evident in the evidence before this extended committee and also in the report that we're bringing down today. And I do want to pay credit to the Secretariat of the Community Affairs Committee that often do go a little bit unacclaimed for the skills that they have, both in handling the range of people who come to see our committee and beginning to have relationships with them and talking with them and understanding their need, and also in the presentation of reports as we have today. Because I think the report being presented today really highlights the areas of difference and also highlights where we can move with some action. These are not monumentally large steps. No one claims that we have solved the problem by this report, but I think that you can see that there has been a movement towards people at least acknowledging the medical issues, the concerns, and also some movement within the medical profession, though in this case, Mr Acting Deputy President, I'd like to say that this movement has not occurred in the AMA, who continue to not respond to the questions that the committee put to them, but a movement towards a willingness to at least discuss, acknowledge that there are issues there that we can work on, and to give the people who have exhibited horrific symptoms, which they believe are linked to being bitten by ticks, that there is the acknowledgement that these conditions are real, they are not hysterical, and they need to have some response from our medical and research bodies in Australia. And so the recommendations in this report, about which I am most pleased, are those which talk about clinical trials, a clear indication of clinical trials on this condition and effective treatment protocols. Number one, acknowledging that this is a medical issue, not a psychological issue, not a psychiatric issue, but a medical issue. So those recommendations around having those clinical trials, I think, raise the issue to another level, and I truly hope that this recommendation will be taken up. And secondly, the ongoing calls that we put in here for scientific, well-resourced research projects which allow an acknowledgement that there may be, and I think personally, though not being a professional in this area, are reasons that link ticks in Australia, the pathogens found in these ticks, to people's illness. So there's a range of recommendations, Mr Acting Deputy President, but they're the ones about which I am most hopeful that we will move this discussion to another level. I'm also very pleased that our report, in the way it was structured, starts with, number one, the title Patients First, so that in the structure of our report we have put the people who have agitated and demanded and made their voices heard about why this issue should be on the agenda, we have put them first, which is indeed where they should be. They should be the number one focus of our response. Mr Acting Deputy President, Senator Lambie and Senator Siewert have both indicated the bravery, the honesty and the extraordinary courage of the people who came to give us evidence, their stories of their illnesses, their story of their family impact, their stories of family loss when people have actually been driven to suicide because of the conditions they have. All of that, again, was shared with the committee. And I take the point that these people have raised their voices and we have no right not to listen. And we have no right, in fact there should be no question about the fact that there must be action. And I indeed am very hopeful with this particular report that we can move forward, and I seek leave to continue my remarks.